How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed, Daf 30 of Masechta Gittin. Friends. Today's daf's a little bit hard. It's like very raw and dry and technical. Let's go weiter. It's not funny. All right. When Daf Lamed Amud Aleph at the Mishnah, about 10 lines into the page. Hamal v'mo'is es hakoyin v'salevi v'sa'oni lios mafish alein mechelkon. Mafish alein bechezkas shein kayomin. V'enu choshe shem ames. Hakoyin o alevi o ha'esher oni. Mesa tzorech litorishus min hayoshim hilvon v'fnei bezdin and tzorech litorishus. Okay. No, so let's read that again, obviously. Hamal v'mo'is is should we talk about it outside? I don't know. We'll see. We'll figure it out, friends. We've gotten this far in Daf Yomi. We can do this Daf Oichet. This isn't even that hard. Okay, I'm like talking it up as if it's like a really hard thing. This is not exactly Masechta Yevamis, friends. You'll be fine. Hamal v'mos es hakoyin v'salevi v'sa'oni lios mafish alein michelkon. So what does that mean? It means the following. Well, I guess the hard part about this Daf is like I feel like it's so detailed that like I guess I don't feel 100% sure that like I'm getting all the details right. Like just the whole arrangement seems like a little bit funny. Like it feels like there's different moving pieces. Is it the Koyin? Is it the Levi? Is it the Ani? There's like, are we talking about Truma? Are we talking about Meiser? Are we talking about Meiser Ani? There's like different nafkaminas. Like it just feels like there's so many details here that it just, right, I guess that's the point. It feels like and there's going to be like a lot more details in the Gemara, and it just feels like there's so many bigger picture things. And I think maybe that's part of, I keep on saying I think maybe that's part of it, which I guess just shows you how like where I'm coming from. I think there's just like a lot of context that you need to know for like a bunch of stuff in here. Like loans and even like interest comes up and different prices and agreements and arrangement. Like I feel like there's a lot of like big sugyas that you have to like understand before you can like learn this stuff. I guess that's kind of how I'm feeling about it. So with all of that, what are we talking about? So I guess the best I could say is like, this is my understanding. Let's say this. For the duration of this daf, I'm going to explain it how I understand it. How is that? Okay. So a guy makes an arrangement. I think the easiest is to work with like the Levi. Because as I mentioned, it's different if you're a Kohen, it's different if it's Truma versus if it's Meiser or Meiser Ani. I think the easiest is to stick with the Levi. So maybe let's just view it from the perspective of the Levi with the knowledge that you'll have to tweak it for the Kohen and the Ani, I guess. Okay. Ooh, a spider. Okay. So a guy lends Babylon? That's not really Babylon. Okay, so a guy lends money to a Levi. And he lends $1,000 to the Levi. And so normally, if you lend somebody money, they pay you back with money. But the guy says, you know what, Mr. Levi? Look, usually every year when I harvest my field, I separate Truma, Meiser, and I give the Meiser to a Levi. You're a Levi, so technically I give the Meiser to you. Now, the reason why I prefer to explain it from the perspective of Meiser and the Levi is because anybody can technically eat Meiser, right? Not like Truma, where really only a Kohen can eat Truma. You have to sell it, whatever it is. But with Meiser, anybody can technically eat Meiser. So therefore, the arrangement that he has with the Levi is look, normally when I harvest my field, I take Meiser and I give it to a Levi. You're a Levi. Technically, right? I would give it to you. So how about this? I'm going to give you $1,000. Now, instead of you paying me back $1,000, keep the $1,000, but I'll keep the Meiser. And when I harvest my field and I separate Meiser, instead of giving it to you, I'll keep it and I'll eat it. And then once I've sort of, withheld $1,000 worth of Meiser, the loan is paid. You could say the same thing for Truma, say the same thing as for Meiser Ani, right? If he lends money to an Ani, so he says instead of me giving you the Meiser Ani, I'll just keep it for myself. The Truma I think is a little more complicated because in order for him to, the Truma I think gets more complicated because I think, what does he have to do? I think in order for him to be to sell it, he has to be a kohen or something. Yimkor truma v'yakiv adam la'atzma b'fer nachov b'shvil kohen. Okay, I guess maybe he could sell, but who's he going to sell the meiser, the truma to? I guess a kohen, and then keep the money from that for himself. Or maybe if he himself is a kohen, he can keep it for himself. I don't know. I feel like the truma gets a little bit more detailed. But the meiser, at least, he can just keep it for himself. Okay. So Mavamos is a kohen v'es a levi. So somebody who lends money to a kohen, to a levi, v'es a ani, or to an ani, lios mafresh alein mechelkan, and the arrangement is that he'll be paid back by withholding, giving the, let's say, meiser to the levi. He'll keep it himself, and that's how he will pay himself back. Mafresh alein b'chezka sheikayom. So he can, so the lender can, when he harvests his fields, he keeps the produce under the assumption that the guy who he lent the money to, the Levi, is still alive. Because as we're going to see in a second, if the Levi dies, then it gets more complicated to keep this arrangement going. But he can keep the meiser for himself, assuming that the Levi is alive. We're not concerned that maybe the kohen died, or maybe the Levi died, or maybe the poor person isn't poor anymore, and therefore wouldn't be shaykh to meiser ani anymore. Mesu, but if they did die, I mean, if the lender knows that this guy's dead, well then, rishus min yorshim. Then he has to ask permission from the yorshim in order to keep this deal going, because this isn't exactly like a regular kind of deal. So you'd have to ask permission from the yorshim if they're willing to keep the this deal going, and then he can continue to withhold, to keep the meiser for themselves. Because I think this is also like another one of these details that so I think normally if it was a regular loan that the Levi had to pay back, well then the heirs would have to pay back the loan. But since this isn't a loan that he actually has to pay back, right? He's just giving him the money and saying, look, it's yours. I'm just going to keep the meiser. So I think because the guy, the Levi didn't necessarily have to pay it back. So I think the children don't necessarily need to keep this arrangement going. But if this doesn't keep going, well then the lender has no basis to be keeping his withholding the meiser. So he's got to ask permission from the heirs to kind of keep this arrangement going. Now, if he lent the money to the Levi in court, in Bezdin, well then well then he doesn't need to ask permission from the heirs to keep this going, because Bezdin has the ability, Bezdin can just sort of say, look, you can keep this arrangement going. Okay, fine. Now, says the Gemara, okay, where did I review this daf? I think I reviewed this daf this morning. Yeah, I did review this daf this morning. I don't know what's what anymore, because again, yesterday was when I went to this chasana and I was on trains and learning, and then I went to sleep much later than I usually do, and I woke up not much later than I usually do, so I didn't sleep much, and I was so tired, and I don't remember when I did what. There's so many details on this page. Even though he never actually received it. So normally, because what's happening here? What's happening here is that the lender is giving money to this Levi, and then basically essentially if you think about it, what should be happening here at least, is that the lender is lending money to the Levi. Could also be a kohen or an ani, but let's stick with Levi. I think it's the easiest one. So this guy's lending, and with all these details, it's probably best to stick with the easiest one. So the guy is lending money to this Levi, and it sounds like basically in return, the Levi is giving him his meiser, right? So I'm giving you $1,000, and then you, the Levi, are giving me back $1,000 worth of meiser that normally would go to you, but now I'm going to keep it. But the thing is, the lender is never giving the meiser to the Levi for the Levi then to give it to him, to give him something from himself. He's just withholding the meiser, so it never actually belonged to the Levi for the Levi to give it to him. So right. So basically, it's kilu, he's like being paid back, but it's not the Levi who's paying back, he's like kind of like paying himself back. Even though the Levi never actually received the Meiser, still, by withholding the Meiser, he's getting, right, the loan is being paid back. So Rav says, well, it's talking about a situation where he was the go-to Levi. I mean, it's obvious that this Meiser was going to go to this particular Levi, and therefore, it's Ki'ilu, he received it, and he's giving it back to him. Okay? Where Shmuel says that, well, what's happening is that the lender is giving the Meiser to somebody else who is receiving it on behalf of the Levi, right? So meaning, right, if I'm the lender and I have this produce, so I can give it to the Levi, or I can give it to somebody else to kind of like be kona it for that Levi, and then after the Levi owns it by way of the proxy, that proxy can then give it back, right? Because of the arrangement, the proxy then gives it back to the lender, and then it's like the Levi gave it to the lender, and that's why it can be repayment for the loan. Okay. Ula Omar Hamani Rabbi Yossi. Ula says that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi the Omar also as she'eno zoche kizoche. And Rabbi Yossi explains that our Mishnah's opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who says that you can even have somebody who's normally unable to be zoche. So meaning, basically what Rabbi Yossi is saying is he doesn't even need to give it to anybody, right? Normally, as we were saying, by simply withholding Meiser, that wouldn't like make it like the Levi had it and returned it to him, right? You're just withholding it. But we're treating somebody who normally wouldn't be able to be zochit for somebody else, right? Normally the lender, by withholding the Meiser, wouldn't be making it the Levi's, but in this case we can say, right, also as she'eno zoche, we're making somebody who normally is not zoche, kizoche, as if he could be mizake to the Levi and then take it back. So, and that is how he can be repaid for his loan. Kulu kirav lo amri. Shmuel and Ula don't hold like Rab b'makari lo katani, because the Mishnah doesn't say anything about this being a sort of a objectively recognized Levi. Kishmuel lo ka'amri, and Rav and Ula don't hold like Shmuel b'mezake lo katani, because the Mishnah didn't say anything about being mezake. And Ula nami lo amri, and Rav and Shmuel don't hold like Ula ki yichida lo mukminan, because Ula is saying that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is a das yochid. Why should we establish like a das yochid if we can establish it like the chacham? Okay. Tana Rabbanan. The rabbis taught hamal v'maos esakoin v'salevi v'soani li osmafish alein michelkon. Okay, so somebody who has this arrangement, right, that he lends money to a Levi, $1,000, and then he's just going to withhold the Meiser and keep it for himself until it's $1,000 worth. Okay, so you can withhold this Meiser, assuming that the Levi is alive and that the deal is still, in place. Ufosik imoin kishar hazol. Okay, and he can get paid back with the cheaper amount, meaning he's getting paid back by the price of, if it's wheat, let's say, if he's got a wheat field. So then, how do you know when it's $1,000? Well, wheat has a price, right? If it's, I don't know, $1 a bushel, and he lent $1,000, so he can withhold 1,000 bushels. But what if the price of wheat at some point drops and it is 50 cents for a bushel? Well, if that's the case, well then he can, hold on to 2,000 bushels of wheat in order to get paid back his $1,000. So we're saying that if at any point the even though at the time of the loan a bushel of wheat was $1, if it goes down to half $1, so then he can use that price of wheat when paying himself back, and therefore get twice as much wheat. Okay, so he can use the cheaper price. the lower price. Ve'ein bo mishum ribis, and there's no issues of ribis over here that normally you would have to sort of have the use an established price of wheat, whereas over here, you can, I guess, be more open with it, and I guess like decide at the time of the loan how much you're willing to, accept it at, and you don't need to wait for the official price apparently, and it would not be an issue of interest. Vein shvius mishamatzo, and when Shemitah comes, that does not interrupt this arrangement, right? Normally, there's Shemitah's ksofim. Normally, if a lender lends $1,000 to a borrower, comes Shemitah, right? That loan is forgiven. But this kind of arrangement, where he lent $1,000 and then he withholds meiser, so that would sort of survive Shemitah, if you could say. If the Baal wants to be choser, I believe, right? Is that Baal? Okay, we're going to explain it. If I'm not mistaken, there's so many details here, but I think that if the lender wants to be choser, he may not. I believe that's correct. Nisyaishu haba'alim, I believe that's in Baal achzor eino choser. I believe that's correct. I guess we'll see it. I think we're going to see it in a few lines. Nisyaishu haba'alim, if the lender who is paying himself back with the meiser, by withholding meiser, if it's like a particularly bad crop that year, and he gives up hope of he says, wow, I'm not going to get, wow, I just lost it. Well then, if fortunes turn around and things are good again, and he says, oh great, wow, things really turned around, let me actually pay myself back with the meiser, he can't, because he already gave up his field. It was miyayish on his field at some point, and therefore that field can no longer be used as the payment from that point on. So ein mafrishin aleim lefi she'ein mafrishin ala avod, because you can't separate, you wouldn't be able to separate the meiser to pay himself back on something that was already lost. Okay. Omar Mar, so we had said posik imoim kishar azol, that he can pay himself back with these bushels of wheat using the a lower wheat, right, a lower price per bushel than at the time of the loan. Pshita, this is obvious. I mean, he can make whatever terms he wants. Even if he wasn't explicit to go by the cheaper terms, by the less expensive terms, sort of the lower price, even though he wasn't explicit about it, we can assume that is the arrangement, and if it's a lower price, he can accept that lower price. Ve'ein bo mishum ribis. There's no concern about interest here. My time outcome kevin dechi leis le lo yoyev le. Well, because since the lender is taking on a lot of risk in that, well, if his field doesn't produce anything, then he's not getting his money back. Well, ki isle nami ein bo mishum ribis. If when there is a if when there is produce and he wants to kind of like set a price for that produce to be getting paid back, we're not going to be concerned about interest in that case. Okay. Vein shvius mishamatzo, and this will endure. I think that's the word I was looking for before. That this arrangement will endure past Shemitah to lo karina be lo yigos, because we don't. Right, because when it comes to, what does the pasuk say? It says, "V'zed dvar Shemitah." This is how Shemitah works. Shamot kol ba'al masha yodo asher yasheb re'eu lo yigos es re'eu v'es achiv. You can't put pressure or whatever on your friend. But this isn't right. He's not pressuring the Levi to pay. The Levi is not under any requirement to pay anything back, and therefore lo yigos doesn't apply, and therefore the lender can continue to pay himself back with this produce. Yeah, that's correct. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So I got that right. Okay. And if he wants to retract, he may not. Amar Papa says, "Papa lo shonu ela bal abayis b'kohen." The lender cannot retract. Now, v'kohen b'bal abayis in balachzor choser, but the kohen or the levi or the ani with the lender can retract. Titnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Nasan lo mos v'lo mosha chimenu peris yachol achzabo. That if he gave him money, but he didn't make a kinyan meshicha, so then he could be choser. Meaning, as I kind of was mentioning earlier, that the Levi is not actually doing any kind of a kinyan meshicha over here. Right? That meaning normally, right? Normally, if the lender was giving him $1,000 and then the Levi was giving him, his meiser, right? So meaning if the lender kind of had the meiser and he gave it to the Levi then took it and took possession of it and then gave it to the Kohen, well then he's actually giving something to the Kohen, and the Levi can't then say that you know what, I wanna take this, I wanna break this off, because the Levi already made a kinyan and was makna to the Kohen, to the lender, this meiser, right? So meaning, let's take a step back for a second. The balabayis, the lender cannot be choser, because once the lender gives the $1,000 to the Levi has no obligation. It's his. He has no requirement or obligation to give it back. So therefore, the lender cannot be choser, because once he gives it to the borrower, to the Levi, it's the Levi's, and that's that. He can't be choser. But the Levi at any point can call it off, because he didn't actually give anything of his to the Baal Habayis. He never committed by making any kind of a kinyan on anything to the Baal Habayis, and therefore at any point the Levi can say, you know what, take back your money and let's call off the deal. So therefore, right, so at any point he can say, take back your money and call off the deal, because he didn't actually take the meiser ever into his possession and then was makne it back to the lender, and therefore he can call it off. There was never any kind of a kinyan there from the side of the Levi, and therefore he can call it off at any time. If the lender, if there was like an issue with his field, and he's like, oh no, there's not going to be anything, all hope is lost, I'm never going to be able to pay myself back, forget it. So then, ein mafish alein, he can no longer sort of pay himself back as part of this deal, because the deal is done. Lefisha ein mafrishin ala avud, because we don't separate, for repayment of repaying himself back the loan on something that's lost. Pshita, that's obvious. Well, it's talking about a situation where before the crops got ruined, they were like already starting to grow and like to become to grow on the stalks. So I might think that from the fact that they're already starting to grow before they got ruined, maybe he didn't really give up hope. No, he did really give up hope, and therefore the deal is off. Tanya ben Yaakov says to ben Yaakov, Hamal v'mos es hakohen v'es halevi bebezdin, that if he lends, right, if you have a lender who lends money to a kohen or a levi in bezdin, umeisu, and then the kohen or the levi died, mafish alein is because he did it in bezdin, so he can continue to pay himself back with his meiser. B'chezkas oso hashevet, because you can assume that the Levim in general would be cool with Bezdin upholding the arrangement that this lender has with this particular Levi, because that's how that would enable loans to take place and transactions to happen, right? There's a concept at the beginning of Masechta Sanhedrin. I'm assuming that it's related to this, that it's relevant here. Shalotino delis bifnei lovin. You don't want to lock doors in front of people looking for a loan, right? And if you make things difficult for lenders, well then borrowers are going to find it difficult to borrow. And therefore, we assume that it is in the interest of the Levim in general that this lender be able to continue to pay himself back, even if the Levi who he lent to died, and not require the lender to give the meiser to other Levim because, the guy who you had an arrangement with is dead, so now give us our meiser. Sort of in the bigger picture, the Levim would rather that his arrangement they had with the dead Levi is respected, because it will enable, it will sort of make loans in general, or securing a loan, more easily achievable. So, mafrish alein b'chezkas oso shevet v'esa ani, And in terms of where am I? Okay, fine. In terms of a poor person, right? If that person dies, right? That again, poor people in general would be happy to allow this, to permit this lender to pay himself back with Meiser Ani, because it's in their interest that we make things easy for the lenders, so that there will be, loans available when necessary. Reb Achi Omer bechezkas Aniyei Olam, and Reb Achi says that not necessarily the Aniyei Yisrael, but the Aniyei Olam. Okay, my Benayu, what's the difference? Ike Benayu Aniyei Kutim, the poor people of Kutim. That apparently Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov would. So if in the city the only other Aniyim are not are Kutim. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they are not proper Gerim, not proper converts. Therefore, they're not considered Jewish, and therefore, you would have to say that it's in the interest of Aniyei Yisrael, right? The poor of Yisrael, even if they're not in your city, but in general, the poor people of Yisrael. Whereas Reb Achi says Chezkas Aniyei Olam, that even includes Kutim, and you would be able to say that it's in the interest of these Kutis in the city that the arrangement be respected. He'eshir ha'ani, if the poor person becomes wealthy, ein mafish olav v'zocha Allah b'masha biyado. Now, if a lender lent money to a poor person, $1,000, and the arrangement was that the lender would pay himself back by withholding Meiser Ani, but then the poor person becomes wealthy, and now he's no longer able to receive Meiser Ani, and therefore he wasn't going to be receiving any Meiser Ani anyways from the lender. So therefore the lender can't pay himself back with Meiser Ani that was, earmarked for this poor person who's no longer poor. So it's called off, but at the same time, the poor person does not need to, give back the money, because that was never part of the arrangement. The arrangement was that the Ani keeps the money, it's his, and the lender will pay himself back with Meiser Ani. But if the Ani is no longer an Ani, he's wealthy now, so then there is no longer any Meiser Ani that was earmarked for this person, because he's no longer an Ani, and basically the deal is called off, but he can hold on to the money that he received. Right? The Ani can hold on to the money that he received. Ve'abonan maishna lemisa davutakanta umaishna la'ashirus davutakanta. How come when it comes to death, we have some kind of a resolution, that we have a resolution for death, right? That if he had lent money to this Levi in front of Bezdin, so we say, well, you can assume that it's in the interest of all the Leviim, and therefore we can keep this deal going. But if he becomes rich, okay, well, then he loses out. So how come we kind of have workaround for death, but not for a poor person becoming wealthy? Misa shchicha ashirus lo shchicha. Well, it's more common for people to die than for poor people to get wealthy. Amr Pape, Hainu Damri Inshe. This is what the people say. Chavroch mis asher is asher lo ta asher. If you hear that your friend died, okay, you can believe the news. If you hear that your friend got rich, not as much. So for that reason, the rabbis were more sort of concerned in dealing with the event that a fellow dies, which is more common than the event that a poor person becomes wealthy. Meis tzarich lito rishus v'chulei. So if the fellow dies, he has to ask permission from the, right, if the fellow dies, the lender needs to ask permission from the estate of the borrower to keep the arrangement going. So this next few lines is like a tiny bit unclear. My understanding is that this is going on the Bezdin situation still. That Bezdin says that that if it was done in Bezdin, so then he can continue to keep the deal going. Okay. So now he doesn't have to ask permission from the heirs. So Tanya, Rabbi Omer says, Rabbi Yorshin Sheyarshu, it's talking about as long as the heirs inherited something. Are there heirs that don't inherit anything? Well, it means that if they received property, if they inherited property, so then this can continue going. The deal can continue, but not if they inherited money. Okay, fine. Amar Reb Yonason says, Reb Yonason, Hiniach milo machat gove milo machat milo kardim gove milo kardim. If the heirs inherited only a tiny bit of land, so then the lender would only be able to inherit to pay himself back a tiny amount of meiser. Melokardim gov melokardim. If he left in, so meaning we said a needle's worth, which is a very little bit of land, but if it's an axe's worth, which is I guess more, so then he could pay himself back up to that value. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan says, that even if the fellow only, bequeathed to his heirs a little bit of land, gov melokardim, still he could, as long as there's some land, then the lender can pay himself back, until he's fully paid back. Okay, the story in Ksubis with Abaye, essentially it has to do with somebody being able to pay himself back from an estate, even if the estate is not worth the entire amount of the loan. Okay, fine. Moving on. Taner Rabbanan, Yisrael she'omer la'levi, ma'aser yeshcha biyadi. So if a Yisrael says to a Levi, I have some meiser for you. Ein choshishin the trumas meiser shabo. We are not concerned about the trumas meiser. The Gemara is going to explain what this means. Give 3 different possibilities for what this means. Kor meiser yesh l'cha biyadi. If the Yisrael says to the Levi that I have a core of meiser for you, choshishin the trumas meiser shabo, then we are concerned about the trumas meiser, right? So if he says that I have meiser for you, we're not concerned about trumas meiser. If he says, I have a core, a specific amount of meiser for you, well, then we are concerned about Trumas Meiser. Maika Amar, what are we talking about? Okay, so 3 possibilities. We're going to have a first possibility, we can ask a question on it, give a second possibility, ask a question on that, and then offer a third possibility. Fine. So, Amar Abai says, Amar, this is what it means. Yisrael she'amar le'Levi, if a Yisrael says to a Levi, Meiser yesh l'cha biyadi, that I have meiser for you, vehelach damav, and here's money. Here's money. Let me give you money for it, and then let me give you money for it, and then I'll keep it. Okay. So Yisrael says to Levi, right? I separated meiser, so I have some meiser for you, but look, let me just give you money right now. Let me just give you some cash, and I'll keep the meiser. So ein choshishin shema aso trumas meiser al makom acher. So this relates back to what we were saying earlier, right? So you have this Yisrael, and he's saying to the Levi, he says, look, I have meiser that I've separated for you. Now, and then he says, look, but let me just pay you for it. Here, take this money, and now the meiser is mine. The thing is, the Levi still kind of is does he own it, or it still, belongs to the Levi, because by the Yisrael simply giving him money, there was never a kinyan that happened, right? He would need, what really needs to happen is that the Yisrael needs to take the meiser, give it to the Levi. The Levi is then koneh it with Meshicha, and then he gives it back to the, right, by taking it, and then he gives it back to the Yisrael. And by doing so, right, he's then giving it to the Yisrael. Now the Yisrael owns it, and the Levi doesn't own it anymore, right? So the Yisrael, gives him money, he pays for it, the Levi takes it and gives it back to the Yisrael. It belongs to the Yisrael, it doesn't belong to the Levi. But that's not what happened here. What happened here is that the Yisrael simply gave money to the Levi, but the Levi never actually picked it up and took ownership of it and then gave it back to the Yisrael, therefore transferring it back to the Yisrael. Therefore, because that kinyan never happened, the Levi it still belongs to the Levi, and the concern is, can the Yisrael now eat this Meiser, because what if the Levi has some other produce somewhere and he says, you know what, I have to separate Meiser from my produce. How about that Meiser that the Yisrael said that he has to give me, that he then paid me for and he held on to, but technically speaking, I never made a kinyan on it, so technically speaking, they still belong to me. I'm going to designate that Meiser that the Yisrael has, I'm going to designate it as Trumas Meiser, that I need to separate from my other stuff, right? Because a Levi, what's Trumas Meiser? A Levi, when he receives Meiser, right? So a Yisrael, anybody, I guess, has a field and they separate Truma, then separate Meiser, they give the Meiser to a Levi. 10% of what the Levi receives, he needs to give to a Kohen, and that's Mamish Truma. Only a Kohen can eat that. So that's Truma. So this Levi has his own Meiser that he needs to separate Truma from, right? Trumas Meiser from 10% of his own Meiser that he needs to separate. He says, you know what? There was that produce that other guy, that Yisrael was telling me about. You know what? I'm going to designate that produce of the Yisrael as my Trumas Meiser, and that way I can keep the stuff that I have, and his stuff will be Trumas Meiser. It will be essentially Truma, and he won't be able to eat it. So the question is, can the Yisrael actually eat this Meiser that he bought from the Levi, or does he have to be concerned that the Levi designated his Meiser that he bought as Trumas Meiser for some other produce of that the Levi has? That's the question. So it says again, so Amar Abai says, Abai Hochikomer, this is what's going on. Yisrael Shomer the Levi, if you have a Yisrael who says to a Levi, Meiser yesh l'cha biyadi, I have Meiser for you, v'heilach domav, but take this money. I'm going to hold on to the Meiser, you just take this money. So again, since the Levi never took the Meiser and gave it back to the Yisrael, he never made a kinyan on it, never made a kinyan mashicha, he never picked it up. So technically speaking, it still belongs to Levi, even though he received money for it. So ein choshishin, we're not concerned, shema aso chumas Meiser amakom acher, we're not concerned that maybe the Levi has some other Meiser that in his own possession, and he has to separate Trumas Meiser, and he's going to say, you know what? How about I'm going to designate that produce that the Yisrael held on to, I'll designate that as my Trumas Meiser, which means that it has a status of Truma, and then the Yisrael would be unable to eat it. We don't say that. We're not concerned that the Levi said designated as Trumas Meiser. But Kor Meiser yesh l'cha biyadi v'heilach domav. But if the Yisrael is more specific, he says, I have 1 kor's worth of Meiser to give to you, but instead of giving it to you, I just want to pay you for it. Well then, Choshishin Shema Aso Trumas Meiser Amakom Acher, well then we have to be concerned that maybe the Levi has his own 9 kors of Meiser, and he'll want to use that 10th kor that the Yisrael told him about and designate that as his Trumas Meiser, in which case the Yisrael would be unable to eat it. So when the Yisrael simply says, I have some Meiser for you and take some money, here's money for it, then we are not concerned that the Levi is going to designate the Yisrael's Meiser as his Trumas Meiser, because he doesn't know how much the Yisrael actually has. The Yisrael didn't tell him. All he says is, I have Meiser for you. And because the Levi doesn't know how much there actually is, he's not going to designate it as his Trumas Meiser. But if the Yisrael says, I have 1 kor of Meiser for you, well then, the Levi says, oh, it's 1 kor. Well, I have 9 kors of Meiser. Let me designate that 10th kor, that 1 kor of the Yisrael as my Trumas Meiser. So in that case, the Yisrael would have to be concerned about it, and therefore he would not be able to eat that Meiser. To which the Gemara says, come on, 1 second. That case is shady. That's really would be very low of the Levi to do that. That the Yisrael's paying him for his Meiser, right? Meaning the Yisrael is saying to him, look, I have a kor's worth of Meiser over here. Instead of giving it to you, can I just pay you for it? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, you could pay me for it. And he takes the money and then turns around and makes it Trumas Meiser, which means that it's Truma and the Yisrael can't eat it. That's a pretty low thing to do. Elo Amar of Mishayisha Breder of Idi, says of Mishayisha Breder of Idi, Hachi Kamran. This is what it means. Yisrael Sha'amar Leben Levi, that if a Yisrael says to the son of a Levi, Meister Lavicha Biyadi, he says, look, when your father was alive, the Levi's father is no longer alive, but when your father was alive, I had told him that I have Meiser for him, that I have some Meiser for him. And look, now that he's dead, instead of giving you the Meiser, let me just pay you for it. Heilach Damav, here's the money. Ein Choshishin Shema Aso Oviv Shumas Meiser Amakom Acher. We're not concerned that the father of the Levi, when he was still alive, had designated this produce for Trumas Meiser for some other Meiser that the father had. But Kor Meiser Lavicha Biyadi Veilach Damav. But if the Yisrael says that I had mentioned to your father when he was alive that I have a core of Meiser for him, and now that he's dead, instead of giving you the core of Meiser, let me just pay you for it. Well, because he had mentioned to the father that it was specifically a core of Meiser, maybe the father would have said, oh, well, I see, I'm being offered a core of Meiser. I have 9 other cores of Meiser. Let me just designate that one as Trumas Meiser. So in that case, the Yisrael would not be able to eat it. But one second, as we've learned before, that you're supposed to separate Meiser or Truma from stuff that is in front of you, right? The father of the Levi should if he was a chaver, if he's somebody who's doing things properly, he should not have designated the Meiser that's in the Yisrael's house as his Trumas Meiser. He should have separated his Trumas Meiser from what's in front of him. So Ella Amar Rav Ashi, rather says Rav Ashi, Hachi Kamer. This is the scenario, and this is the final scenario. Ben Yisrael Sha'amar LeLevi, the son of a Yisrael, who says to a Levi, Kach Amar li Abba, my father told me when he was alive, Meiser lecha biyadi. That right there he told you that there was Meiser, that there was Meiser. No, the son says that my father is dead, but he told me that there is Meiser for you. O Meiser lavicha biyadi, or he told me that there is Meiser for your father. Choshishin l'chumas Meiser shavo. So the Levi has to be concerned that Trumas Meiser has not yet been separated from this Meiser, and that the Levi, has to separate it himself. Kevan de lo kitz lava misakin le balabayis. Because since the father did not tell the son, right? The father of the Yisrael did not tell the son how much Meiser there actually was, so that means that he wasn't aware of how much there was, and therefore he definitely didn't separate Trumas Meiser from it. So again, so you have the son of a Yisrael who's saying to a Levi, look, my father told me that I have some Meiser for you. The question is, can we assume that the father had already separated the Trumas Meiser or not? So if the father didn't give a specific amount of how much Meiser there is, he didn't say how much Meiser there is, well then we can assume that he hadn't yet separated Trumas Meiser. But core Meiser l'chabiyadi, if the son of the Yisrael says, look, my father had told me that he has a core of Meiser for you, or core Meiser l'avicha biyadi, or that he has a core of Meiser for your father, takune takne balabais, we can assume that if the father was somebody who follows mitzvahs and does things properly, he would not have kept tevel around in his house, and he would have already separated Trumas Meiser, which means that we can assume that the Levi does not need to separate Trumas Meiser. Okay. But one second. So we had just said that if the son of the Yisrael says that my father had told me that he has a core of Meiser for you, the Levi, we can assume that the father had already separated Trumas Meiser. But can a Yisrael separate Trumas Meiser for a Levi? Yes, he can. Abba Shaul ben Gamli, it's the opinion of Abba Shaul ben Gamla. Titania, as we learned by what? Abba Elazar ben Gamla. I don't know if I said Abba Shaul ben Gamla. Abba Elazar ben Gamla Omer. V'nechshav lochem trumaschem b'shtei trumas hakosu medaber. Then when the pasuk says chumaschem, plural, we're talking about two different chumas. Achas chuma gedola, v'achas chumas meiser. One is chuma gedola, regular chuma, and the other one is meiser min meiser. It's chumas meiser that the Levi separates. Kshem chuma gedola, and he tells us be'omer u'machshava, just like chuma gedola. There's no specific amount for chuma gedola. It's, however much you want to give. Generally speaking, it's 2%. But you don't have to be, scientific about it. You can evaluate 2%, because at the end of the day, you can give whatever amount you want. So he tells Ba'omer, it could be given like estimated. With machshava, you can also do it with machshava, meaning theoretically you can like eat, some produce and just say like, have a look at it and say, okay, that part I'm going to be separating later, and then you can eat the rest of it. Kach Chumas Meiser, he tells Ba'omer of Machshava, the same thing by Chumas Meiser. You can evaluate it, and you can sort of just in your mind set aside which part you're going to be setting as Chumas Meiser. Uchshem sheyesh lo rishus lebalabayis lisom Chuma Gedola, kach yesh lo rishus lebalabayis lisom Chumas Meiser. And just like the owner of the field could separate the Truma Gedola, the regular Truma, he can also separate the Chumas Meiser for the Levi if he wants to. Friends, that was Daf Lamed of Masechta Gittin. It was just like a lot of kind of very detailed stuff there. A lot of very detailed stuff there. I hope you're into it. Peace.